My name is Destiny. I'm 29 years old, and I'm standing in a bank manager's office staring at a credit report showing $847,000 in debt I never took. My hands won't stop trembling as I read through 23 fraudulent accounts, and then I see the signature that makes my blood run cold because I know that handwriting better than my own, it's my mother Elizabeth's. Before we dive into how my own family orchestrated the complete destruction of my life, and how I brought their entire criminal empire crashing down, I want to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe because this story will show you that justice is possible even when it comes from the people who were supposed to protect you. Trust me, what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. 3 months before that devastating moment in the bank, I was living what I thought was my best life as a marketing director at a tech startup in Seattle, earning 6 figures, and proud that I could finally help my family the way I'd always dreamed. Every month without fail, I sent $2,000 to my mother Elizabeth, who was 56, and claiming disability from a back injury she said happened at her factory job, though I later learned she'd never worked there at all. I thought I was being the good daughter, the one who made it out and could lift everyone else up, but I had no idea I was just a mark in a con game that started the day I turned 18. The first red flag appeared when I was visiting my childhood home in Portland and noticed a stack of credit card statements with my name on them sitting in my mother's kitchen drawer. When I asked about them, she waved it off, saying they were probably just pre-approved offers that came to their address by mistake, and I trusted her because why wouldn't I trust my own mother? But something felt off, so I decided to check my credit report for the first time in years, since I'd been planning to buy my first home, and that's when my entire world imploded. The bank investigation revealed a sophisticated fraud network that made my stomach turn with each new discovery. My mother Elizabeth had been using my social security number to open accounts since literally the day I turned 18, starting with a small credit card that she kept just under the limit and paid minimum payments on to keep it active while building up my credit score for bigger scores later. My older brother Jonathan, who was 33 and always talked about his restaurant business that never seemed to actually open, had taken out a $150,000 business loan using my identity, defaulting on it after using the money for God knows what. My cousin Frida, 31 years old and supposedly in nursing school for the past 5 years, had actually taken out $65,000 in student loans under my name, while never attending a single class, using the money to fund her lifestyle of designer bags and trips to Vegas that she posted all over social media. My uncle Leon, the 54-year-old smooth talker who always had a new business venture, had used my identity to secure financing for a car dealership that existed only on paper, racking up another $200,000 in debt before disappearing the money through a maze of shell companies. When I confronted my mother with printed evidence of everything she put on the performance of her life, breaking down in tears, and admitting to some of it but immediately spinning herself as the victim, she claimed poverty had driven her to desperate measures, that I had abandoned the family by moving to Seattle for my career, that if I really loved them, I would understand she had no choice. She actually had the audacity to say that since she gave birth to me and raised me, my credit belonged to the family anyway, and that I should be grateful they didn't take more. The immediate consequences hit hard and fast as my apartment complex ran a routine credit check for lease renewal and immediately served me with an eviction notice giving me 30 days to vacate because my destroyed credit made me too high risk. My dream of buying a home turned into a nightmare of trying to find anyone who would rent to someone with a credit score in the 300s, and I ended up having to put down 6 months' rent up front just to get a studio apartment in a sketchy part of town. The forensic accountant I hired cost me $5,000 I could barely afford, but what she uncovered was worth every penny. Because it showed this wasn't just family members making desperate choices. This was an organized crime ring that had been operating for 8 years. My family had been systematically stealing identities from vulnerable relatives, with my mother Elizabeth as the mastermind running everything from her position as church treasurer, where everyone trusted her with their financial information. She had access to social security numbers, bank details, and personal information for dozens of elderly congregation members, though I was her favorite target because of my high income and perfect credit history. The investigation revealed that Jonathan's restaurant was never meant to open. but was instead a money laundering operation for his illegal gambling debts, using my identity to secure loans that would be defaulted on after the money was cleaned through fake vendor payments. I found receipts showing he'd been living like a king, buying boats and motorcycles while I was working 60-hour weeks thinking I was helping my struggling family. The depth of betrayal hit different when I realized every time he hugged me at family dinners, he was calculating how much more he could steal. What broke my heart completely was discovering they'd also been using my deceased grandmother's identity, a woman who raised me with love and always told me I was destined for great things. Leon had forged her signature on documents 2 years after she passed away, taking out reverse mortgages on property she'd left to various family members and pocketing the money. The disrespect to her memory made me physically sick, and I spent that entire night crying and apologizing to her photo for not protecting her legacy. When word got out that I was digging into the family finances, Elizabeth called an emergency family meeting at her house, where I walked into what felt like an intervention, except I was the one being attacked. 23 family members sat there as Elizabeth painted me as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to destroy the family over a few misunderstandings about money. Jonathan stood up and actually said that since I made so much money in tech, I should be honored to help the family in any way necessary, and that going to the authorities would be the ultimate betrayal. Leon took a different approach, pulling me aside after the meeting and making it crystal clear that family doesn't go to police or accidents happen. He reminded me that he knew where I lived, where I worked, and that Seattle wasn't so far away that problems couldn't follow me there. The threat was delivered with a smile that made my skin crawl, and I realized these people weren't my family anymore. They were criminals who saw me as nothing but a resource to be exploited. Frida immediately started a campaign to destroy my reputation in our community, spreading lies through social media and at church that I was actually a drug addict who had stolen from the family and was now trying to blame them for my own financial mistakes. She posted old photos of me from college parties, editing them to make innocent drinks look like drug paraphernalia, and created fake text conversations where I supposedly admitted to having a gambling problem. The smear campaign was so effective that longtime family friends started avoiding me, and my own aunts were calling to lecture me about getting help for my supposed addictions. The stress of fighting this battle while trying to maintain my job performance led to mistakes at work that put me on probation, with my manager expressing concern about my sudden decline in productivity. I couldn't explain that I was spending every lunch break on the phone with credit card companies every evening, documenting fraud, and every weekend meeting with lawyers and investigators. My boyfriend of 3 years, Marcus, tried to be supportive at first, but eventually said he couldn't handle the drama and needed to think about his own future, leaving me to face this nightmare alone. Just when I thought I understood the full scope of their crimes, I discovered that my family had been intercepting my mail for years by keeping my childhood address on file for important documents. They had a system where Elizabeth would steam open anything financial, scan it for opportunities, and then either destroy it or forward it to me months later, claiming mail delays. This explained why I'd missed several important notices over the years, including scholarship opportunities and job offers that could have changed my life trajectory even more. The most devastating discovery came when I found out Elizabeth had posed as me to decline my grandmother's inheritance of $300,000, instead directing it into an account she controlled. My grandmother had specifically left that money for me to pursue my dreams, writing in her will that she wanted me to use it to start my own business someday. Elizabeth had forged my signature on legal documents and convinced the estate lawyer that I wanted the money to go to family care instead, then split it among her criminal network. The situation escalated when Jonathan broke into my storage unit, where I'd been keeping important documents safe from the family. Security footage showed him using bolt cutters at 3 a.m, loading boxes of my personal records into his truck. When I reported it to the police, they said it was a civil matter since he was family, and without proof of what was in those boxes, they couldn't do much. I knew those boxes contained my birth certificate, social security card, passport, and years of tax returns, everything they needed to continue their fraud. Even while I was frantically trying to close fraudulent accounts, they were opening new ones, adding another $50,000 in debt in just 2 weeks. They'd gotten sophisticated using virtual private networks and fake addresses to apply for credit online, sometimes opening 5 or 6 accounts in a single day. Each time I thought I'd locked down my credit, they found another loophole, another institution that hadn't updated their fraud alerts, another way to exploit my information. Frida's harassment campaign reached new lows when she created fake profiles to catfish my ex-boyfriend Marcus, somehow obtaining intimate photos from when we were together and sending them to my workplace human resources department with claims that I was running an escort service. The HR investigation was humiliating as I had to explain the situation to multiple executives, show evidence of the fake profiles, and prove the images were from a consensual relationship years ago. Even though I was cleared of wrongdoing, the damage to my professional reputation felt irreversible. Leon's criminal connections started making their presence known in increasingly threatening ways. My car tires were slashed 3 times in 2 weeks, always with a note saying, "Family takes care of family." Strange men would follow me from work, keeping just enough distance to avoid police intervention, but close enough to let me know I was being watched. One night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly open, nothing stolen, but everything moved just enough to send a message that they could get to me whenever they wanted. When I finally gathered enough evidence to file a police report, my mother pulled her ultimate manipulation by faking a heart attack right in the police station. The performance was Oscar-worthy as she clutched her chest, gasping about how her own daughter was trying to kill her with stress. The paramedics found nothing wrong with her at the hospital, but the damage was done as the officers now viewed me as the heartless daughter, traumatizing her poor, sick mother. Elizabeth knew exactly how to play the system and the sympathy card. The fraud expanded beyond just credit cards and loans as hospital bills started arriving for procedures I'd never had at hospitals I'd never visited. $38,000 in mysterious medical debt for surgeries, emergency room visits, and specialist consultations, all coded to my Social Security number. When I investigated, I found that Frida had been doctor shopping using my identity, getting prescriptions for pain medications that she was likely selling, while billing everything to insurance policies taken out in my name. The darkest revelation came when I learned they'd sold my identity information to a larger crime ring for $10,000, essentially putting my entire financial existence on the dark web for any criminal to use. The forensic accountant found my information being traded on illegal forums, packaged with dozens of other victims as a premium identity theft package. My family had turned me into a commodity, selling me piece by piece to the highest bidder without a second thought about the lifelong consequences I'd face. Church members began shunning me based on Elizabeth's carefully crafted lies about my supposed mental breakdown and drug addiction. People I'd known since childhood would cross the street to avoid me, and the pastor actually called to suggest I seek treatment before returning to services. Elizabeth had weaponized an entire community against me, using their trust in her as the treasurer to validate her false narrative about her troubled daughter, who was trying to destroy a godly family. The final straw came when security cameras at my temporary apartment caught Jonathan attempting to break in at 2 a.m, clearly looking for any remaining documents or evidence I might have against the family. When I showed the footage to police, they finally started taking my claims seriously, but by then I'd lost my job, my relationship, my community, and nearly my sanity. I realized if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop playing defense and start fighting back with everything I had. My counterattack began with a carefully orchestrated reconciliation dinner, where I pretended to forgive the family and want to make amends, all while wearing a wire provided by the private investigator I'd hired with my last savings. Elizabeth was suspicious at first, but her narcissism won out as she believed she'd finally broken me down and I was ready to fall back in line. Over the course of 3 hours, I got her to admit on tape to opening accounts, forging signatures, and stealing my inheritance, all while she laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate her trusting daughter. The private investigator, a former FBI agent named Morrison, uncovered a goldmine of evidence, including Leon's previous victims from 3 different states where he'd run similar identity theft schemes. We found 12 elderly victims who'd lost their life savings to his car dealership frauds, and several were willing to testify if it meant finally seeing him face justice. Morrison's connections in law enforcement helped us understand we were building a federal case that could bring serious prison time. Not just the slap on the wrist my family expected. The breakthrough came when we discovered Elizabeth's hidden notebook during a trash pull operation, where she'd meticulously documented every fraudulent account, every forged document, and every stolen dollar like she was keeping score in some sick game. Her own compulsive need to track her crimes became the roadmap prosecutors would later use to unravel the entire operation. The notebook showed she'd stolen over $2.3 million through various schemes over the years, with detailed notes about which family members were most vulnerable to exploitation. Technology became my weapon when we found Jonathan had filmed himself bragging about the scams on private social media accounts, thinking he was safe behind privacy settings. These videos showed him literally counting stolen money while laughing about how his stupid sister was funding his lifestyle from Seattle. In one particularly damning video, he detailed exactly how he'd laundered the restaurant loan money through cryptocurrency, before converting it back to cash, providing prosecutors with a step-by-step confession they couldn't have gotten any other way. Frida's downfall came when the nursing school she claimed to attend confirmed she'd never been enrolled, and further investigation revealed she'd been running her own side scheme of selling fake nursing credentials to other people. The forged transcripts and diplomas she'd created using my identity as a reference had fooled several healthcare facilities into hiring unqualified staff, putting patients at risk, and adding medical fraud to her growing list of charges. Her narcissistic need to brag about her nursing knowledge online made it easy to prove she had no actual medical training. When Elizabeth demanded $50,000 from me to keep quiet about even worse things she claimed to have done in my name, I gave her marked bills provided by law enforcement and planted a GPS tracker in the bag. Following that money led investigators to an underground gambling operation where my family had been betting stolen funds, trying to multiply their crimes into even bigger payoffs. The surveillance footage from that raid would later show Elizabeth, Jonathan, and Leon all present at high-stakes tables, destroying their claims of poverty and desperation. My investigation uncovered that Elizabeth had been exploiting 3 other young relatives' identities, kids who were just turning 18 and had no idea their credit was being destroyed before they even had a chance to build it. One cousin was trying to get student loans for college and discovered $40,000 in debt she knew nothing about. Another was denied housing assistance because Elizabeth had used her identity to claim benefits in multiple states. The pattern showed this would have continued to the next generation if I hadn't stopped it. The family's retaliation came swift and vicious when they realized I wasn't backing down. They filed false reports with the IRS, claiming I'd been evading taxes on hundreds of thousands in unreported income, forcing me to hire a tax attorney to defend against audit proceedings. The stress of fighting battles on multiple fronts while being unemployed drained my savings completely, and I was surviving on credit cards that I could barely get approved for with my destroyed credit score. Some nights I ate ramen noodles while paying lawyers thousands of dollars I didn't have, but I knew giving up meant they'd won. Leon's criminal associates escalated their intimidation tactics, vandalizing my car with acid that destroyed the paint and left threatening messages etched into the metal. They wanted me to know they could destroy more than just property if I continued cooperating with law enforcement. One particularly frightening night, I woke up to find someone had been in my apartment while I slept, leaving a photo of me sleeping on my own pillow. The message was clear that locks and security systems meant nothing to professionals. Frida created increasingly sophisticated deepfake videos, showing my face on explicit content, sending them to every professional contact she could find on my LinkedIn, with messages claiming I was offering services. The technology was sophisticated enough that several people initially believed them, and I spent countless hours with a digital forensics expert proving the videos were fake. She'd found a way to violate me that felt worse than the financial crimes, trying to destroy any chance I'd have at a future career. Elizabeth's masterstroke of evil came when she filed official elder abuse charges against me, with Adult Protective Services claiming I'd been stealing from her and emotionally abusing her for years. She had fellow church members write character statements about what a devoted mother she was and how I'd always been troubled and ungrateful. The investigation required me to prove my innocence while she played the victim, supported by a community she'd manipulated for decades, who couldn't believe their trusted treasurer could be a criminal mastermind. By the time I was officially terminated from my job for excessive absences and performance issues, I'd become blacklisted in my industry as word spread about the chaos surrounding me. Recruiters who'd once eagerly pursued me now wouldn't return my calls, and my professional network dried up as people distanced themselves from the scandal. My entire career built on years of hard work and dedication evaporated because my family saw me as nothing more than a credit score to exploit. The private investigator Morrison made the connection that changed everything when he discovered Leon wasn't just running local scams, but was connected to an interstate fraud ring that crossed state lines and triggered federal jurisdiction. The FBI had been tracking this network for years without understanding how it operated, and suddenly my family's crimes became part of a much larger investigation. What started as personal betrayal had exposed a criminal enterprise worth millions in stolen identities and fraudulent gains. Armed with mountains of evidence and the support of federal investigators, I began the systematic dismantling of my family's criminal empire with the cold precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit assigned 3 agents to the case once they understood the scope, and I spent weeks in conference rooms going through every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence that would ensure prosecution. Special Agent Rivera told me she'd rarely seen family fraud this extensive and organized, comparing it to mob operations in how they compartmentalize different aspects of the crimes. The first arrest happened at 6 in the morning when Jonathan was caught during a money exchange with marked bills from the gambling operation, still cocky enough to think his little sister would never really turn him in. The look of shock on his face when FBI agents surrounded his car was captured on surveillance footage, and I watched it over and over, finally seeing fear in the eyes of someone who'd terrorized me for months. He tried to flip immediately, offering to testify against everyone else if they'd reduce his charges, showing exactly how much family loyalty meant when facing federal prison. My lawsuit against the 3 major credit bureaus forced them to acknowledge their security failures that allowed my family to repeatedly access my credit despite fraud alerts and supposed protections. The case attracted media attention as consumer advocates pointed out how easy it was for family members to destroy someone's financial life with just basic personal information. The bureaus eventually settled for an undisclosed amount that helped me pay legal fees and start rebuilding, though no amount of money could restore the years of perfect credit I'd lost. The day I walked into Elizabeth's church with a folder of evidence showing she'd embezzled over $300,000 from the congregation's building fund was the day I took back my reputation. I presented bank records, forged checks, and a clear paper trail to the church board, watching their faces change from skepticism to horror as they realized their trusted treasurer had been stealing from the collection plate while preaching about honesty. The news spread through the congregation like wildfire, and by Sunday, Elizabeth's carefully crafted image as a godly woman was completely shattered. Creating the website where Leon's previous victims could share their stories and find resources became my therapy and my weapon. Within 2 weeks, 47 victims had come forward with combined losses over $8 million, showing a pattern of fraud spanning 15 years across 7 states. The site became a resource for prosecutors building cases in multiple jurisdictions, and Leon's attempts to have it taken down only brought more attention to his crimes. Elderly victims who'd lost their retirement savings finally had hope of justice and restitution. Frida's house of cards collapsed when her employer discovered her fake nursing credentials after I sent an anonymous tip with irrefutable evidence. The hospital's investigation revealed she'd been administering medications and performing procedures she wasn't qualified for, putting countless patients at risk. The state nursing board pursued criminal charges for practicing without a license, and several patients filed civil suits for medical malpractice. Her dreams of being seen as a medical professional ended with handcuffs and a perp walk that made the evening news. The coordinated raids on my family's homes happened on a Tuesday morning that I'll never forget, watching from across the street as FBI agents carried boxes of evidence from the house where I grew up. Elizabeth tried to maintain her victim act, even as they led her away in handcuffs, wailing about her ungrateful daughter loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But the agents had seen the notebook, heard the recordings, and traced the money. They knew exactly who the real victim was in this story. Media coverage exploded after a local reporter picked up the story of family identity theft on this scale. And suddenly, my phone was ringing with interview requests from national outlets. I chose carefully which stories to tell, focusing on helping other victims recognize the signs of family fraud and understand they weren't alone. The segment on national news generated thousands of emails from people sharing similar stories, creating a community of survivors who understood the unique betrayal of being victimized by those who should protect you. When my family tried hiring a defense attorney with stolen funds, the FBI froze every account connected to their fraud network, leaving them reliant on public defenders who quickly realized the overwhelming evidence against their clients. The asset forfeiture proceedings identified millions in illegal gains from Jonathan's boats to Leon's luxury cars to Elizabeth's secret investment accounts. Watching them lose everything they'd stolen felt like poetic justice, though it could never fully compensate for what they'd taken from me. Jonathan's wife, Sarah, who'd always been cold to me at family gatherings, called me crying after learning the truth about where their lifestyle came from. She'd believed his lies about successful business ventures and family money, never questioning why they lived so well while his restaurant never opened. When she filed for divorce and took their 2 kids, Jonathan blamed me for destroying his family, never acknowledging that his crimes were the real cause. Sarah later testified about financial irregularities she'd noticed but been told not to worry about. Frida's arrest at the airport while trying to flee to Mexico became a viral video when she tried to claim diplomatic immunity as a medical professional serving humanity. The TSA agents were remarkably patient as she ranted about being persecuted for helping people even as they found multiple fake passports in her luggage. Her social media followers who'd believed her nurse influencer persona watched in shock as their role model was exposed as a complete fraud who'd endangered lives for money. Leon's criminal associates turned on him immediately when offered plea deals, providing detailed testimony about his role in the larger fraud network. These hardened criminals showed more integrity than my family, at least being honest about their crimes when caught. Leon tried to maintain his threatening demeanor in court, but federal charges and former associates testifying against him transformed him from predator to prey. The fear I'd felt for months dissolved as I watched him realize he'd spend his elderly years in federal prison. The church where Elizabeth had wielded such influence held a special service to apologize to the congregation and the community members she'd turned against me. Former friends approached me with tears saying they should have known better than to believe the lies about my supposed drug addiction. While I appreciated their apologies, the damage to those relationships felt irreparable, and I knew I'd never again feel comfortable in the place that had been my spiritual home. The pastor personally apologized for not seeing through Elizabeth's deception and offered to testify about her manipulation of the congregation. By the time the extended family finally understood the truth and began reaching out with apologies, I'd learned to protect myself from their words the way I should have protected my identity from their crimes. Some genuinely hadn't known about the fraud and were horrified to learn they'd supported criminals, while others had suspected but chosen comfortable ignorance over uncomfortable truth. I accepted their apologies but made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or allowing them back into my life where they could hurt me again. The federal courthouse in Portland became my second home during the 3 weeks of trial, where I testified for 3 days straight, detailing every fraudulent account, every forged signature, and every moment of terror I'd experienced while my family tried to silence me. The prosecutor called me the most prepared witness she'd ever worked with, as I documented everything with the obsessive detail of someone who knew paper trails would be my only salvation. Sitting in that witness chair facing my family as defendants instead of relatives felt surreal but necessary. Elizabeth's performance on the stand would have been impressive if the jury hadn't already seen the recorded confession from our reconciliation dinner. She actually tried to claim I'd manipulated the recording with artificial intelligence, that the voice admitting to crimes wasn't really hers. When the prosecutor played the section where she laughed about how I was too trusting and called me her golden goose, meant to fund the family forever, several jurors visibly recoiled. Her tears seemed real when she realized her manipulation wouldn't work on federal prosecutors and judges the way it had on family and church members. The revelation that shocked even me came when Elizabeth admitted under oath that she'd started planning to use my identity when I was just 14 years old, keeping detailed notes about my social security number and practicing my signature. She'd viewed my academic success and college ambitions as her future payoff, encouraging my dreams not from love, but from greed. Every proud moment at my graduation, every celebration of my promotions had really been her, calculating how much more she could steal. The prosecutor had to pause testimony when I broke down, realizing my entire relationship with my mother had been a long con. Jonathan received 8 years in federal prison for money laundering and identity theft, his bravado completely gone as the judge detailed how he'd betrayed the sister who'd tried to help him. He actually tried to mouth sorry to me as they led him away, but I looked straight through him, knowing his only regret was getting caught. His wife Sarah sent me a letter thanking me for exposing the truth, saying their children deserved better than a father who built their life on crime. And she was starting over with her family's support in another state. Leon's sentencing to 12 years reflected his role in the larger interstate fraud operation, and the judge's disgust at his threats against me. The judge specifically noted that threatening a witness and victim showed a dangerous disregard for law and family bonds that warranted maximum punishment. Leon tried to maintain his tough guy image until the judge read victim impact statements from elderly people who'd lost their homes to his schemes. By the end, he looked like what he really was, an aging criminal who'd run out of people to con. Frida got 5 years plus mandatory restitution to her medical fraud victims. Her dreams of Instagram fame as a nurse influencer replaced with federal inmate status. The judge ordered her to pay back every cent of the student loans taken in my name, though we all knew she'd spent that money long ago. Her social media accounts were used as evidence of her lavish lifestyle funded by fraud, and the courtroom watched her vacation videos knowing each trip was paid for with stolen money. She cried throughout sentencing, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Elizabeth's 15-year sentence as the ringleader sent shockwaves through our extended family and community, as many couldn't reconcile the grandmother figure with the criminal mastermind. The judge's scathing comments about a mother who viewed her child as nothing more than a resource to exploit became part of the court record and local news coverage. Even at sentencing, she blamed me for destroying the family instead of taking responsibility for her crimes. Her final words to me in court were that I'd regret this when I needed family, and had no one still not understanding that she'd already taken my family from me. The judge's commendation of my courage in pursuing justice despite family threats and community pressure felt hollow compared to what I'd lost, but his words about the severity of family financial abuse being overlooked too often rang true. He noted that family identity theft causes unique trauma because it violates the fundamental trust between relatives, leaving victims isolated and doubting their own perceptions. His recommendation that I receive priority consideration for victim restitution funds offered hope that I might recover financially, even if the emotional wounds would take longer to heal. The credit restoration company that took my case pro bono after the media coverage treated me like a VIP client, assigning their best team to the monumental task of separating my legitimate history from years of fraud. They found accounts I hadn't even discovered, bringing the total fraudulent debt to over $1.2 million across 37 different creditors. Each dispute required extensive documentation, sworn affidavits, and sometimes legal threats to force creditors to acknowledge the fraud and remove it from my record. My former employer reaching out with an apology and job offer felt like vindication, but I'd already decided Seattle held too many painful memories. They offered a promotion and relocation package to their Austin office where I could start fresh without the shadow of my family's crimes following me. My new boss had followed the trial coverage and admired how I'd maintained my integrity while fighting for justice. She said anyone who could manage that level of crisis while documenting everything so meticulously was exactly who they wanted leading their compliance team. The relationship with Marcus was definitively over, and his attempts to reconcile once he saw the truth in news coverage felt too little too late. He sent flowers and apology letters, but I remembered how quickly he'd abandoned me when things got difficult, how he'd chosen his comfort over supporting me through the worst period of my life. I returned his letters unopened and blocked his number, knowing that rebuilding my life meant leaving behind anyone who hadn't believed in me when it mattered most. The government's seizure of family assets through civil forfeiture returned nearly $2 million to the Victim Restitution Fund, though the process of distributing it would take years. My grandmother's house, which Elizabeth had secretly mortgaged, was saved from foreclosure and transferred to a trust for her legitimate heirs. Watching the family home get emptied of its contents for auction felt like watching my childhood get erased, but those memories were already tainted by the knowledge of what had really been happening behind closed doors. The letter from Jonathan in federal prison arrived 6 months after sentencing, recognizable by his handwriting, that I'd once helped him improve in elementary school. I held it for an hour, wondering if there could be any words that would matter, any apology that would help. But I realized that opening it would just give him power over my emotions again, would let him back into my head when I'd worked so hard to get his voice out. I tore it up without reading it, and felt lighter knowing I'd chosen my peace over his need for absolution. Starting the nonprofit organization called Family Fraud Survivors became my path to transforming personal trauma into purposeful action, using everything I'd learned to help others navigate the unique challenges of identity theft by relatives. The application process for 501c3 status felt like reclaiming my identity in the most literal way, using my restored credit and cleared name to build something positive. Within the first year, we helped over 300 victims understand their rights, connect with appropriate legal resources, and most importantly, realize they weren't alone in their experience. The 18-month journey to rebuild my credit score from the 300s to 700 felt like climbing a mountain with weights on my back, each small improvement a victory worth celebrating. Every successful dispute, every fraudulent account removed, every point increase represented hours of work and documentation. The day I finally qualified for a mortgage on my own terms with my own credit for my own home, I sat in my car and cried tears of joy, mixed with grief for the years stolen from me. Therapy with a specialist in family trauma and financial abuse helped me understand that Elizabeth's behavior exhibited classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder, mixed with antisocial traits that made her capable of viewing her own child as an object to exploit. Learning about psychological manipulation tactics helped me recognize how she'd groomed me from childhood to be compliant, to prioritize family needs over my own, to never question why a mother who claimed to love me could systematically destroy my future. Understanding the pathology didn't excuse the crimes, but helped me stop blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. My move to Austin represented more than just a new job. It was a complete reinvention of self, away from anyone who knew my story. I chose a small condo near the river, nothing fancy, but entirely mine, purchased with clean money and a rebuilt credit score. The first night in my own home, I walked through each room marveling at the peace of knowing no one could take this from me. No one had keys but me, and every bill would come to this address where I'd see it first. At the survivors support group, I met Alexandra, another woman whose family had stolen her identity, though on a smaller scale, and we bonded over the unique grief of mourning people who were still alive. She understood why I couldn't just get over it and move on, why family holidays felt like reminders of betrayal rather than celebration. Our friendship grew from shared trauma into genuine connection, and she became the sister I chose, rather than the family forced on me by blood. The financial security firm that hired me valued my experience with fraud from the victim's perspective, and I threw myself into developing new protocols to detect and prevent family identity theft. My personal experience informed policy recommendations that helped thousands of people protect themselves from similar crimes. Speaking at conferences about security vulnerabilities and victim support felt like turning my pain into purpose, though I always needed a day of solitude after sharing my story publicly. My blog From Betrayal to Breakthrough gained over 100,000 followers as people connected with the raw honesty about family financial abuse and the complicated emotions of prosecuting relatives. Every week brought messages from people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, or just thanking me for making them feel less crazy for suspecting their family members of financial crimes. The community that formed around shared experiences became a support network stronger than any biological family had ever been. The opportunity to testify before Congress about identity theft law loopholes came through connections made during the trial, and I spent weeks preparing testimony that would honor not just my experience, but the thousands of victims I'd heard from. Sitting before the House Financial Services Committee, I explained how current laws made it nearly impossible for family fraud victims to get justice without extraordinary evidence and resources most people didn't have. The proposed legislation that followed, while not perfect, closed several loopholes my family had exploited and made it easier for victims to freeze their credit proactively. Some extended family members who'd been genuinely ignorant of the crimes reached out wanting to help with the nonprofit, and after careful consideration, I accepted help from 2 cousins who'd also been victimized, though less severely. Their volunteer work helping other victims felt like breaking the cycle of exploitation, showing that family could choose to help rather than harm. We maintained careful boundaries, and they understood why holiday gatherings and family reunions would never include me again. The letters from prison continued arriving not just from Jonathan, but from Elizabeth and Frida too, all forwarded through lawyers since I'd made it clear direct contact violated my boundaries. I developed a ritual of burning them unopened in my fireplace, watching the paper curl and disappear like the relationships themselves. Each letter destroyed felt like reclaiming power, choosing my peace over their need for forgiveness, or continued manipulation from behind bars. The speaking engagement at the Financial Crimes Conference, where I first shared my story publicly without shame, marked a turning point in my healing journey. Standing before 500 professionals, I spoke about the intersection of family trust and financial vulnerability, the ways predators use emotional bonds to facilitate fraud. The standing ovation afterward felt less like applause for me, and more like recognition that this hidden crime deserved attention and resources. Several investigators approached afterward, saying my insights had helped them solve cases they'd been struggling to understand. Elizabeth's attempt to contact me through a prison ministry volunteer who believed her version of events showed that even incarceration hadn't changed her manipulative nature. The volunteer called saying my poor mother was devastated by our estrangement and just wanted to apologize, clearly having been fed a story about a misunderstanding rather than systematic fraud. I calmly explained the 15-year federal sentence was for crimes, not misunderstandings, and asked her to verify the facts before becoming another victim of Elizabeth's manipulation. Writing the book about my experience became another form of therapy, putting the entire story into a narrative that others could learn from while processing my own journey, from victim to survivor to advocate. The advance from the publisher went entirely to the nonprofit funding legal clinics for victims who couldn't afford the representation I'd barely managed. Seeing my story in bookstores felt surreal, but the emails from readers saying it helped them recognize and escape their own family fraud situations made the vulnerability worthwhile. The final moment of closure came 3 years after the trial, when I stood in my new office as Director of Consumer Protection at a major financial institution, looking at my wall of certifications and achievements earned with my own name and clean credit. My assistant knocked to say the senator was ready for our video conference about the new identity protection legislation I'd been consulting on. As I straightened my jacket and prepared to discuss policy that would protect millions of Americans from what I'd experienced, I realized I'd built a life my family couldn't have imagined when they saw me only as a resource to exploit. I thought about Destiny at 29, shaking in that bank office discovering the betrayal, and wished I could tell her it would be okay, that she was stronger than she knew, that family isn't about blood, but about who stands with you when your world falls apart. The family I'd created through choice, the survivors and advocates and friends who'd supported me, they were worth more than any biological connection that came with a price tag attached. Blood might make you relatives, but it doesn't give anyone the right to destroy your life. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who should have protected you, but chose to prey on you instead. Looking back, I wouldn't wish this journey on anyone, but I also wouldn't be who I am without it. Every scar tells a story of survival. Every rebuilt credit point represents resilience. And every person helped through our nonprofit makes meaning from meaningless cruelty. My family tried to steal my identity, but in fighting back, I discovered who I really was. Someone stronger than their greed, more valuable than my credit score, and worthy of a life built on truth instead of lies. To everyone watching who's experienced family betrayal, financial or otherwise, know that your pain is valid, your anger is justified, and your decision to protect yourself is not selfish but necessary. If my story resonates with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below, because together we can break the silence around family financial abuse. Like this video if you believe victims deserve justice, regardless of who commits the crime, and subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph over those who tried to break us. Share this with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in choosing their own well-being over toxic family loyalty. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember you have the right to build a life free from anyone who sees you as less than human, even if they share your DNA.